As I mentioned there, the National Rural Crime Network is calling for an overhaul of the way rural crime is dealt with. It's commissioned a new report which says serious organised criminals are increasingly preying on rural communities. It highlights hare coursing, the theft of tractors and livestock, and fly tipping as having major impacts. The report from Durham University says these crimes are often carried out by prolific rural offenders linked with illegal drugs rather than being opportunistic. Dr. Kate Tudor is Associate Professor in Criminology at Durham and wrote the report.
Rural crime is both serious and complex and involves organised crime groups in a number of ways. Up until now, it's been quite difficult to evidence these links because of the way that we currently police organised crime. So in the UK, or England and Wales, we have what are called regional organised crime units, and they are involved in the kind of threat assessments for organised crime. Unfortunately, rural crime doesn't often meet the thresholds for involvement of ROCUs, and therefore rural crime quite often fails to feature in organised crime data. So it's very difficult to understand the extent of organised criminality in rural areas.
So is that simply then because although the police will acknowledge it's a serious crime if livestock, for instance, or tractors are stolen, because there isn't that sense of threat, these regional police organisations won't look at it?
Well, it's quite complex, actually. It's perfectly understandable why this doesn't happen, because rural crime is competing with much higher harm offences, such as child sexual exploitation, terrorism, and so on and so forth. So you can understand how it doesn't meet the thresholds when compared with those offences. But what this research has recently shown is that actually we do have high levels of organised crime involvement in rural criminality. So we have rural crime groups that have been formally mapped by regional organised crime units. Generally speaking, they tend to be people involved in the theft of plant and agricultural machinery and vehicles. Generally speaking, when they relate to other high harm offences such as ATM rip-outs using things like telehandlers. There are a huge number of groups operating as organised crime groups who just fall outside of formal mapping procedures. So all of the criminality bears the hallmarks of organised crime. It's cross-border in nature, it's involving groups, sometimes involving transnational networks, but they haven't been formally mapped according to these procedures, so they don't appear in organised crime data.
Now, in your report that you wrote for the National Rural Crime Network, you're calling for an overhaul of the way police deal with rural crime. But last year we did see the National Rural Crime Unit created. So is that not having an impact?
It certainly is. So we've seen huge transformations in rural policing in the UK over the last couple of years. We're seeing much better levels of coordination between forces. We see better intelligence sharing. We see better allocation of resources between forces. And this is something really to be welcomed. But the thing that we really need to be aware of is that this unit is actually externally funded. It's completely dependent on external donors. So I think the NPCC has a lot more that it needs to do to support rural policing.
Are you confident that, given the scale of the problem, that money will be forthcoming?
I very much hope it will be, because what I'm hoping that we've been able to do is to sketch out the high levels of harm associated with rural crime, but also the significant links to other forms of high harm offending, predominantly within the arena of drugs markets. So the research was able to show some really strong links between rural offenders and those involved in the supply and production of drugs. And so hopefully this will kind of underscore the importance of tackling rural crime, because it currently forms a fundamental part of the criminal portfolios of serious and organised criminals.
Dr. Kate Tudor there. That's it from us.